Good afternoon and welcome to another Sweet Thursday program. Today with food scientist Marion Nestle. Thank you for joining us for another Zoom webinar. Our next program is in 2 weeks on May 26th, also by Zoom. This is a reminder that today we are using Zoom webinar format, and unlike Zoom meeting, we cannot see or hear any of you. Q&A is open for you to type in questions, and we will get to a selection of them at the end of the presentation. Please don't use the raise hand or chat features. All of our programs are recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel. Sweet Thursday is the author series sponsored by the Friends of the Lafayette Library and Learning Center, which is the all-volunteer organization that sells gently used books in order to support the Lafayette Library. My name is Jeff Deeden, and I'm the coordinator for Sweet Thursday, and I'll be moderating today's program. We have one final webinar, and then hopefully we will conclude this season of Sweet Thursday with an in-person appearance. On May 26th, Dave Zirin will discuss the world of sports activism as described in his book, The Kaepernick Effect, Taking a Knee, Changing the World. On June 30th, Lee Kravitz will explore the events surrounding the writing of the bell jar in The Last Confessions of Sylvia P. And then in our WOW series, The Wonders of the World, on June 8th, a docent will highlight the DeYoung Museum's Obama Portraits Tour, featuring art from the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. Note that this program will not be recorded. If you miss a webinar, you can catch it on our friend's YouTube channel shown here. In order to learn about more library programming, you can sign up for our weekly ad-lib emails, which come Saturday mornings and describe upcoming events, including those hosted by the Library Foundation and the County Library. You can do this by signing up at llcf.org/subscribe. And this is the Library and Learning Center Foundation website. For even more programming at other Contra Costa County branches, you can go to the county website, which is ccclib.org. And you can search using a variety of the tabs. The Friends Corner Bookshop sells gently used, inexpensive books that support a number of programs and services at the library, as shown here. The Friends Amazon store, selling higher value used books, can be accessed via the Friends tab at the library website. Once again, we thank the Friends of the Lafayette Library, the library staff, the Lafayette Library Foundation, and my Sweet Thursday committee members. And a reminder that you can buy Marion's book at Lorinda Books. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. So, I have followed tonight's author for many years. Originally introduced to her writings by my food blogging and nurse daughter, I have subscribed to Marion's daily emails for years and attended a lecture a few years ago by her at Cal's Edible Education 101 course. Dr. Marion Nestle is the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Science Studies, and Public Health Emerita at NYU, which she chaired from 1988 to 2003, and from which she officially retired in 2017. She is also a visiting professor of nutritional sciences at Cornell. She earned a BA in bacteriology, a PhD in molecular biology, and a master's in public health, all from the University of California, Berkeley. For a decade between 76 and 86, she held a variety of academic teaching and leadership positions at UCSF, and she wrote the Food Matters column in the San Francisco Chronicle for 5 years. She now resides in New York. Her research interests include food and nutrition policy development and analysis with a focus on dietary guidance, social and environmental influences on food choice, the politics of food safety, the effects of food industry marketing on diet and health, and conflicts of interest raised by food industry sponsorship of food and nutrition research and practice. Her awards and bibliography are far too numerous to mention here, but she is the author of 9 books about the food industry, such as Food Politics, Eat, Drink, Vote, Soda Politics, as well as tonight's book, Unsavory Truth, and has a new book coming out in October titled Slow Cooked, An Unexpected Life in Food Politics. Marion, it is my honor to welcome you to the Library and Learning Center. So let me unshare here. And
shall I magically appear?
If you can turn on your audio and video.
Well, the audio is on.
We'll
How's
be going.
The
So,
are we all set? We're all set.
I think we're set. There we go. So let me tell you how I want to kind of craft tonight's discussion. I'd like to start with a brief overview of your career, and then discuss our featured book, and then move on to your new book. So first, how did you get involved with food, and specifically food politics? And what were some of your early influences that pushed you in that direction?
Well, I'll start with food. I just love to eat. That was a sort of, I mean, I think food is one of life's greatest pleasures. It's something you get to do several times a day, and you can do it the way you want it. It's really wonderful. So I've always loved food, and I would have studied it when I went to Berkeley if I could have figured out a way to do it. At the time that I was a student at Berkeley, there were really only 2 choices. You could study agriculture, but I was a city girl. I didn't understand anything about agriculture until much later. Or you could do dietetics. And I actually went to Berkeley as a dietetics major, but I failed it very quickly. It was too much like home economics at the time. I was taking a required 5-credit chemistry course. And I got interested in science and got sidetracked on science all the way through my doctorate. So that's the food part of it really didn't come until I was teaching at Brandeis University. It was my first teaching job. And I was in a department that had very unusual rules. I've never heard of another department like it. You could only teach the same class 3 times, and then you had to change because they wanted faculty to be fresh. And I had taught cell and molecular biology 3 times. Students were sitting in the department chair's office demanding human biology courses. And that's where the second rule came in, where you had to teach anything that was needed, whether you knew anything about it or not. Because the philosophy was that if you had a doctorate, you knew more than undergraduates and could learn it very quickly. So I was basically handed a nutrition class to teach. Actually, I was given a choice between nutrition and physiology, and I picked the nutrition because, and we're talking early 1970s here, Frances Moore Lappé had just published Diet for Small Planet, now in its 50th edition.
Yeah.
Center for Science and the Public Interest had just gotten started, and they had published a book called Food for People Not for Profit that could have been written yesterday. It was a book of small articles about food issues. I have to tell you, the food issues haven't changed very much. They're all still there. And Linus Pauling had written Vitamin C and the Common Cold. And I thought, I'll use these books as textbooks in my sophomore class. And I'll have the students do the research to see whether the science backs up the ideas that are in these books. And we were off and running. That's how it started.
Wow, that's not what I would have guessed, but cool. Those, the inadvertent things that happen, those rules got you going. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Unsavory Truth. Um, and I think as an illustrative and particularly egregious example of influence on research, why don't you tell us about the fifth quarter fresh chocolate milk and the scandal at the University of Maryland?
Oh, I think I'm going to have a hard time remembering the details of it. But fifth quarter fresh was dietary supplement made with chocolate, if I remember correctly. And it was being advertised as something that could solve the problems of concussions. Of people, of kids who were playing football, that if you drank fifth quarter fresh, you wouldn't have the problems with your brain that were already being observed in athletes who had had numerous concussions. And there was an investigator at the University of Maryland who did a study that showed that high school students who drank this stuff had fewer symptoms of concussion than high school students who didn't drink this. And of course, the people who were reading this study were kind of shocked, and reporters got after it and quickly were able to demonstrate that this investigator had been funded by Fifth Quarter Fresh to do this study, that it hadn't been done very well, big surprise. And that basically he was being paid to do these kinds of results, and much ensued afterwards. I'm not sure he's still at the university, but he certainly got into a lot of trouble, and that product is no longer around. But it was certainly an example of the most appalling use of food industry funded research, of which there are many such examples.
Yeah. Your appearance here today is in keeping with one of the themes. I've been doing this particular role with the library for 5 years, and I've had Dr. Robert Pearl, who is the CEO of the Permanente Medical Group, who runs Kaiser out here and actually in the Maryland area, and wrote a couple of critical books critical to the healthcare industry, and also Carrie Gillum, author of the Monsanto Papers. And they both, expose the influence of these industries on the so-called research into the science of pharmaceuticals and in chemicals. So can you give us some comparison of how food industry influence works, uh, similar to that of either the pharmaceutical industry or tobacco or chemical industries, and some differences if there are any?
Yeah, and in theory, it's very much the same. The main difference is the level of study. I think the most investigated, there's a whole field of research looking at the effects of funding influence. And researchers who study that have used the pharmaceutical drug industry as an example, and have studied that industry. They're now 50 years. They're 5 decades, more than that, of research on drug industry funding of research. And what that research shows consistently over 50 years, literally thousands of studies, show that a drug funded study will demonstrate benefits of the drug that is produced by whoever is funding the study, that the results of the study will almost invariably show benefits. The investigators will not realize that they have in any way whatsoever been influenced by the funding. They don't see it. They don't think it exists. They didn't intend to be influenced. They think they're completely independent. And they deny that the funding had any influence despite vast amounts of research to the contrary. And that makes the issue really difficult to study because the investigators don't see it. And yet time after time after time, the research comes out in favor of the sponsor's product, although independent investigators often find that it does no good or is actually harmful. The other part of that is that there are researchers who have looked at where the influence occurs. One of the arguments that people who take industry funding have is science is science. We did the science according to the highest possible standards. And this is undoubtedly true. That's not where the problem is. The influence comes in primarily in the way the research question is asked. And the easiest way I can explain that is I get letters all the time from trade associations saying, we have $50,000, $100,000. We're looking for research proposals for studies that will demonstrate the benefit of our product. Okay, that's what they're looking for. That's what they're going to get. Nobody is going to write a proposal for a research project that isn't going to show benefits, and they're not going to fund a study that that runs the risk of not showing benefits.
Even if they say, in the disclaimers that, we had no participation in the design of the study.
Yeah, the problem with those disclaimers that the funders had nothing to do with the design, conduct, interpretation, or publication of the study is that there have been many, many studies that have showed that statement to be an outright lie. So you don't know when you are looking at a disclosure. These disclosures are in articles. Most scientific journals require researchers to disclose conflicts of interest if they have a deal with if they're being funded by, if the study is funded by a company with a vested interest in the outcome of the study, or if the researcher has financial ties to such a company. They're required to say that. And there have been many studies that demonstrate that a substantial portion of those statements aren't true. And so you have no way of knowing whether those statements are true or not. There have been papers that have been retracted or have published corrections over that sort of thing. But it's very hard to know whether to believe that kind of statement. And it isn't that all industry funded studies come out with results favorable to the sponsor. Sometimes they don't. And I did this very unscientific semi-study on my blog for a whole year. Every Monday, I posted 5 industry-funded studies. I did this for about a year, and at the end of the year, I had 168 industry-funded studies, and of those, 156 had results that favored the sponsor's interest. Only 12 didn't, and this was after begging readers of my blog to send me examples of industry-funded studies that did not come out with favorable results. When more systematic scientific studies have been done to see what proportion of research comes out with, is industry funded and what proportion of that comes out with favorable results, the percentages are smaller. So mine was a convenient sample. It certainly wasn't anything I published. But it's so easy to find these things. I can recognize industry-funded studies by their titles. If I see a study that says that one particular food is going to prevent heart disease or cancer, or is going to make people smarter, it's going to prevent the cognitive decline in aging, I'm pretty sure that somebody who is a trade association or a company that makes that food product has paid for the research, because who else would do that kind of research? It makes no sense. We eat very complicated even the ones diets. I'm sorry.
I'm sure there are plenty of studies that still a minority in this situation that show unfavorable results, but they never make it to publication.
That
The
also
authors
is the
don't
case.
submit them.
Yeah, or the funder refuses to, or the funder has the right of first refusal. That sometimes happens.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. Well, in the pharmaceutical industry, not so much with publication, but in talking about unconscious bias, in my practice, uh, I would routinely go to a conference and enjoy a nice meal courtesy of, a device, a new stent manufacturer, angioplasty balloon company, or a CT scanner, and thought nothing of it.
Mhm.
And I accepted, and then little gifts and things. And then one time, that same Dr. Robert Pearl, he was our CEO at the time, he brought it to the board and said, "We're not going to do this anymore." This is in the 90s. Said, "We know all kinds of data about how this affects physician behavior."
Mhm.
And at the same time, they had previously outlawed detailing of drugs to the primary care doctors. And we didn't like it because we fully believed that our choices had nothing to do with those dinners. And there's ample research. And the funny thing was, when I retired, and I was now able to accept those dinners, they don't come anymore.
Oh,
So
what a
there you go.
pity.
Because they have nobody to influence. I can't help them by buying their products.
Yeah, I mean the drug literature is replete with with studies that show how detailers, that is the pharmaceutical representatives who go and visit individual physicians, how much the prescription practices of those physicians change after the detailers visit. And I know that when I was teaching at UCSF, it was still during the time when medical students got free stethoscopes from drug companies, and drug companies were constantly giving them dinners and all kinds of things. That's all stopped now.
Yeah. So let's talk about like some of these. You have a chapter on superfoods, and like pomegranate juice and pecans and blueberries. So why shouldn't we eat healthy foods like these? And one of the issues that some of them bring up, antioxidants, the so-called free radical scavengers, have they been shown actually? We know that they scavenge free radicals, but do they actually change disease outcomes? So, tell us a little bit about the superfood marketing.
Well, I hate to be mean about fruits and vegetables because I'm greatly in favor of eating fruits and vegetables. But it's sort of a pet peeve at the idea that one fruit or vegetable is substantially different than any other fruit or vegetable. The wonderful thing about nutrition is you're supposed to eat a variety of foods because individual foods have different levels of different kinds of nutrients, and if you mix and match them, you're pretty well covering your nutritional needs without ever having to worry about it. So the idea that blueberries or pomegranates are superfoods makes absolutely no sense to me, and it also makes absolutely no sense to me that adding one food to your diet is going to make a substantial difference in your health. You want to add lots of different fruits and lots of different vegetables and lots of different nuts and lots of different grains. I can hardly think of a specific fruit, vegetable, or nut that doesn't have a trade association behind it that is sponsoring research to demonstrate that this nut, this berry, this fruit, this grain is a superfood, meaning that it has effects on your health that go way beyond its nutritional value. Um, I wish that were true, but I don't think it is. They have plenty of research that will show that one or another of these fruits and vegetables, and a lot of this research, by the way, is sponsored by the Department of Agriculture as part of its marketing initiatives. And that's how this research has to be understood. It's marketing research. In fact, one of my friends said, this research is terrific. It all ought to be published in a brand new journal called the Journal of Industry Funded Research. Because it's all about marketing. The idea is to get people to buy more pomegranate juice, to buy more blueberries, to buy more whatever. Well, I'm in favor of that, but not for those reasons.
Exactly. Well, that kind of segues into supplements. And
Oh,
I think
dear.
that's in a separate book, but if you have a balanced diet, you, by doing what you just said, eating different foods and getting different nutrients from them. But people think that, well, I can make up for all that by eating supplements. So do you have any comments about the supplement industry in general?
Oh, boy, do I ever. Yeah, the supplement industry, supplements are fascinating. More than half of American adults take supplements of one kind or another. So they're extremely widely used in the population. And they're used, people take supplements because they think they're going to do some good. They're pretty sure they're not going to do much harm. So they're not worried about that. And they believe that the supplements that they're taking make them feel better. It's very hard to argue otherwise. And if, these days things are really tough. If you've got something that makes you feel better, I say go for it. But the supplement industry, the big difficulty with supplements is the science just isn't there. It is proven to be very, very difficult to demonstrate that supplements make healthy people healthier. And since healthy people are the people who take supplements, the people who need supplements are the last people in the world to be taking them. There's really very little evidence that taking a vitamin, mineral, herbal, or sports supplement is going to make anybody who's healthy to begin with any healthier. And the Office of Dietary Supplements at NIH, I've talked to several heads of that office over the years, and they all say, we would love to prove that supplements make people healthier. We just don't have the evidence. We cannot prove it. So
Well,
that's
what about for unhealthy people?
Well, if you're vitamin deficient, if you're diagnosed with a vitamin deficiency, you take a vitamin for it. That works. What the supplement industry tries to suggest is that people are marginally vitamin deficient, but there's no diagnosis for that. It's hard to, it's vague. As I say, if you want to take a vitamin supplement, take one a day. I'm not going to object to it. But the supplement industry is fierce about this kind of thing. And in 1994, they got the late Senator Orrin Hatch to propose and to get through Congress the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, which essentially deregulated supplements. I thought this was a terrible idea. I thought that the supplement industry needed to be respected, and it needed to have some kind of credibility. And the only way it was going to be credible would be if the FDA was involved in monitoring what was going on with supplements. But it essentially took the FDA out of the business of monitoring dietary supplements. And what we're left with is a situation in which you really don't have any way of knowing whether what's in the product you're buying is actually what it says on the label. And a study has just come out talking about sports supplements in particular that showed that a really amazing percentage of them, between 20 and 30% of them, somewhere between a quarter and a third, had unapproved drugs in them. I mean, basically sports enhancing drugs. And the people who wrote the paper said, this is going to be a real problem for professional or amateur athletes who are being tested for drugs, because these substances are going to show up on drug tests and they're in trouble and they're not labeled on the supplement and nobody's minding the store. Occasionally the FDA heard about this and has just issued a bunch of letters to the makers of sports supplements telling them to get their act together and get the unapproved drugs out of their supplements. But that happens only when something is brought to the FDA's attention. Otherwise, they're not paying any attention to it because they're not allowed to. There were many court cases about health claims on supplements that the FDA said they couldn't make. The makers took the FDA to court, and the courts ruled in favor of the supplement makers on First Amendment grounds. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think the founding fathers intended the First Amendment to protect the right of supplement makers to lie about what their products can do. But that's the way the courts are interpreting it. And so supplements are allowed to make a special category of health claims that's unregulated by the FDA called structure function claims. And these are claims that the product promotes or supports some function of the body. So it'll say supports a healthy heart. So they can say supports a healthy heart. That's an unregulated health claim, whereas helps prevent heart disease is a regulated health claim by the FDA. It takes a lawyer to tell the difference.
Well, support is such a vague verb, it can mean a lot of things. Like you take a vitamin that supports your sense of, well-being, as you were suggesting a minute ago. Anyway, shifting from superfoods to something not so, you have a whole chapter on CocaCola.
I do.
So what, they're trying to make us, tell us about the diversion tactics that they use, focusing on, mobility and exercise rather than calorie consumption. And what is it, the GEBN,
Yes.
and what kind of pressure they bring on universities and researchers with their studies.
Yeah, Coca-Cola got its own chapter because they got caught, basically. They got caught lying. And in 2015, I was at the last stages of production of a book called Soda Politics, how the food industry, I can't remember what the subtitle was, but it's taking on the food industry and winning. I wrote that book as an advocacy manual, how you advocate to get sodas out of people's lives and out of schools and out of libraries and out of other places, because sweetened beverages are not very healthy for you. So I was kind of, as part of that book, I was looking at research that Coca-Cola was funding that was very much in its interest. I mean, the same kind of thing. Coca-Cola was funding studies to demonstrate that Coca-Cola was harmless, sugar was harmless, exercise was more important than what you eat or drink. And any studies that showed anything else were so badly done that you didn't have to pay any attention to it. A classic cigarette industry technique for diverting attention from something that was potentially harmful. And they, there was a group that in the sort of I think it was in August 2015, there was the New York Times had an investigative report published on a group called the Global Energy Balance Network, which were a group of researchers at very prestigious universities who were arguing that obesity really didn't have anything to do with what you ate and drank. It was all about physical activity. This is exactly the opposite of what the research shows, unfortunately. And in their announcement of this network, which is going to be a network of researchers who are going to talk about the importance of physical activity, which absolutely is very important, but not for body weight so much, they neglected to mention that the organization was funded by Coca-Cola. Somebody got wind of it and tipped off the New York Times. The New York Times did a big investigative report, and the Times published an enormous article outing the Global Energy Balance Network and what Coca-Cola had done in its funding of these investigators. I was quoted in the article, and my quote was run as a banner headline across the top of an inside page. Nobody could miss it. And I got lots of calls from reporters, and the reporters were just stunned. They couldn't believe that Coca-Cola was funding this kind of research. They couldn't believe that university professors were accepting money from Coca-Cola for doing this kind of research. And they couldn't believe that universities were allowing their faculty to do this. And I thought, if reporters didn't understand how the system worked, I had another book to write, and that was the genesis of Unsavory Truth. I started working on that book right away, even before Soda Politics came out. So Coca-Cola was very systematic. It considered the researchers as part of its team. The reporter got all these emails. The reporter, used Freedom of Information Act to get emails from these investigators, and was able to show the correspondence between Coca-Cola and the investigators. They were very close, is the only way that I can describe it. This was hardly independent research, and I believe that the investigators who were involved in it probably thought that this was a completely reasonable thing to do. Who could possibly be against physical activity? Everybody's for physical activity. But the whole purpose of this from Coca-Cola's standpoint was to convince people that Coca-Cola is not a factor in body weight. It's how active you are.
Yeah. So do soda taxes work?
Yeah, they do to some extent. Yes. I'm a little hesitant about it because it depends on what your outcome measure is. If your outcome measure is decline in sales, certainly the Berkeley experience, which has been vastly studied, demonstrates that that sales of sodas went down in Berkeley after the soda tax was passed. And the soda tax, by the way, was passed by a vote of 76%, which is pretty incredible. And I use it as an example of fabulous community organizing by the committee that proposed that tax, and they're showing in Berkeley a substantial decline in sales. Whether that translates to a reduction in obesity prevalence, I'm not sure. That's much more difficult to show.
Yeah.
But anything, I mean, it's sodas are sugars and water and nothing else, and nothing other than small quantities is a good idea. If you're going to have a soda, have an 8-ounce can. Don't have a 20-ounce one, because you're mainlining sugar if you're doing that. And it's really not healthy to do that.
Okay. I think I stole this next question from another interviewer that I watched or read about, and I've adapted a little bit. But he asked, as you have shown in this and previous books, nutrition sciences and big food companies have a long and intimate relationship. Despite these ties, at the heart of your work is the belief that nutrition science should play a more independent role in providing eaters and policymakers with accurate and useful evidence to make personal and policy decisions. And then my question on a related note, because it's obvious that a lot of these people they need funding to do research.
Mhm.
And you point out that government funding is declining for a lot of types of research. So how does a researcher go about, deal with this problem of being presented with a bunch of money so that they can run their studies and publish and stay alive in the academic world, um, and yet have some sense of neutrality and unbiased stance.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's possible to be unbiased if you've got food industry money that's paying for a study, but there certainly are ways in which you can build firewalls. Um, and yeah, it's hard. I think people who there are real questions that you can investigate. And the question is whether this is an investigator initiated study or whether it's a industry initiated study. If it's industry initiated, it's a marketing study. If it's investigator initiated, and an investigator says, I want to study these different types of diets, and the maker of one of the diets is so convinced that that product is going to be better than the others, then the maker takes a chance on it. If the study comes out with results in favor of the funder, it doesn't look very good. If the study comes out otherwise, the funder's not going to be pleased. So it's a difficult situation. I would argue that a really good research proposal is going to get funding. Good science gets funded, even now. But I think there's a big difference between marketing science and other kinds of science. And most of this work, the industry funded stuff, is for marketing purposes. It's not about furthering science.
So you think that this could all go away if they would acknowledge that this bias occurs and submit grant proposals to wherever, other funding sources, and get enough funding to support all the people doing this work?
Doing which work? I don't
research about nutrition.
Well, but I don't consider the kinds of studies that are being funded by food companies to be very important scientifically. They're marketing studies.
No, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm just wondering, and
I think
obviously
science gets funded.
I'm speaking of ignorance because I'm not in the world, but if there's a finite number of people doing research in nutritional departments around the country and world, and maybe there aren't as many questions. I don't know.
Well, the NIH has just put $150 million into precision nutrition research.
So there is money if you
there's money for
construct
science. There's money
Okay.
for science.
So it ought to be more public health oriented.
Or I think those studies get funded. Good studies get funded.
Okay, so these people don't have to accept it, and they can go elsewhere. And
Yeah, I mean, they might argue otherwise, or they might argue that this is completely legitimate research. We view this differently.
Okay. All right. Well, rather than go into more examples of that, I think now why don't we talk about slow cooked?
All right.
Tell us what's in the book, and I since I haven't seen it, it's coming out in October. Tell us about it.
Well, it was my pandemic project. I found myself with a lot of time once the pandemic started. Before that, I had a pretty active travel lecture and speaking business, and that stopped cold when the pandemic started. So I had a lot of time, and I couldn't use libraries because the libraries were closed. So the kind of research that I usually do, which involves a lot of library research, I could do the online part of it. But I talked to my agent about it and said, well, maybe it's time for the memoir, because I get asked all the time, the kinds of questions that you're asking about how my career started. How did I get interested in food? How did I get interested in food politics? How do I feel about being a target for food industry opposition, being called names by food industry people? What happened? Why did it take so long? I was pretty old when I got started. Those kinds of questions. And then from students, how do I prepare for a career like yours? I want to do what you do. Those kinds of things. So I thought I could probably put together um, I could tell the story of my particular career and the difficulties that I had, and see if people would be interested in it. And University of California Press, which has published several of my books, this will be my 6th book with University of California Press, agreed to publish it. I think it's their first memoir, at least in the food and culture series. And it's as I like to put it, I'm a nonfiction writer, and this was a real challenge. So, I mean, my memory is my memory, not any better than anybody else's.
All right. So there was, advisory committees, dietary advisory committees. Should experts that are on these have any financial ties to the industry? Is this obvious question, but what do you think about that? And university, any university rules apply to this sort of thing? Are there any things that forbid this? Again, I'm just making up questions that are based in ignorance, but I'm just wondering, how do you prevent some of these things?
Well, universities have conflict of interest rules, and I certainly had to fill out a conflict of interest statement every year at NYU. Whether anybody ever looked at the statements, whether they followed up on them, I have no idea, but you need to report any source of funding other than the university. And I reported money from royalties and lectures, but I don't take money from food companies. So, I didn't have those kinds of conflicts. The Dietary Guidelines Committee is another issue because a paper has just come out analyzing the conflicted interests of members of the 2020 to 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which showed that 95% of the members of that committee, which I think meant 19 of 20 out of the 20 people who were on it, had financial ties either to food companies themselves or to front groups for food companies. And the dietary guidelines, I've complained for years and years and years about the dietary guidelines, which use euphemisms for anything that they advise eating less of. So they will never say in any really direct or clear way, stop drinking sugar-sweetened beverages. They'll say, limit your intake or do something like that, something very vague. But they will say, keep your sugar intake to 10% of calories or below, without ever talking about what the main sources of sugar are. So for people who read the guidelines, they're very difficult to understand. They're very long, for one thing. I think the last ones were 164 pages. Many, 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 many pages on the web. And it's hard to figure out what the guidelines are and what the advice is. You have to interpret everything. And does the fact that the members of the committee have ties to food companies have anything to do with that? I don't know. I thought this committee did actually a pretty decent job. It wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. And it looks like the agencies that are setting up for the next round of dietary guidelines are going to be paying attention to these questions. So we'll have to see. But it's very hard to find senior nutrition faculty who don't have ties to food companies, because in my experience, a lot of people don't care. They don't think it's an issue. That troubles me. That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
My hope for the book was that it would change the profession and get everybody concerned about it, but I have to say I failed.
Let me take some questions from our audience. One is, can you say anything about the benefits, if any, of probiotics?
They get into the microbiome. Oh, the microbiome is so exciting. Everybody just loves it, and nobody has any idea what it means. Probiotics are bacteria that are in yogurt. And if you have a really good yogurt that's got lots and lots and lots of them, you're eating good bacteria. If they get through the acid in your stomach and get into your intestinal tract, they can do good things for you. I don't see a whole lot of evidence that people who eat yogurt are healthier than anybody else, particularly since so much yogurt is sugar sweetened. It has all those additives in it and all that other stuff. But you can try fermented food, same thing. Lots of evidence that people who eat fermented foods seem to be healthier. I don't know. I like them.
Those will get past the GI, the stomach.
Yeah, sometimes.
Or kombucha. Next question. Have you read Pat LaFrieda's book, Glorious Beef? If so,
No,
would you
I
share
haven't.
your opinion of his content?
I haven't, I'm sorry.
Okay. If a vitamin does not have a USP label, don't buy it, question mark. Is Costco one of the most reasonable places to purchase vitamins?
I think, if you're going to buy a vitamin supplement, just buy it from a reputable manufacturer. I don't know what else to say. Otherwise, if it's listed as a supplement, that means the FDA is not paying a whole lot of attention to it. And you really don't know that you're getting what you're supposed to be getting. But, if you have a big manufacturer, a drug company is making they stand to lose a lot of money if somebody finds something wrong. So they have a bigger incentive to do it right.
Okay, here's one. What do you think of meat and health versus nuts and other sources of protein?
Well, I'm not a vegetarian. I eat meat, and I don't eat a lot of it. And I follow my dietary advice, eat a largely, but not necessarily exclusively plant-based diet. I think the evidence for largely plant-based diets being really good for health is very, very strong by now. And meat has a place in those kinds of diets. It just doesn't have an enormous place. So I eat meat. I try to eat the kind that's raised in reasonable ways and spend a little bit more money for it, but don't eat very much of it.
Michael Pollan's 7 words.
Absolutely. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That really covers it.
Yeah, I like that one too. Yeah, I eat meat but less than I used to, and mix it up, and not very much red meat. But anyway, I think, oh wait, here we go. If a study has been funded by NIH, for example, rather than a marketing branch of an industry, would you suggest that it is worthy of following the results?
Well, I think all research is worth following. You just have to interpret it. And it's not that NIH investigators aren't biased. They have biases too. It's just that the food industry bias puts it in the category of marketing. And I think there's a big difference. I think all investigators are biased. If they weren't biased, they couldn't do research. You wouldn't be able to pick a research question if you didn't have a reason for wanting to know the answer to that question. So the NIH, I don't consider the NIH funded studies to be necessarily unbiased. I think they're unconflicted. And there's a difference, and it's the conflicts of interest that come from industry funding that are so disturbing, because it moves what should be science into the category of marketing, which I think isn't good for science. I'm not sure if that gets at what the question is trying to aim at, but that's my reaction to it.
Okay. And here's one. Tell us about dark chocolate. Generally good for heart health?
Only if you eat pounds of it. Pounds and pounds. I've got a chapter in Unsavory Truth that has a big section on Mars funding of chocolate studies. Mars started out trying to demonstrate that dark chocolate was a health food. And they got into trouble with the FDA and they switched. And so now they're selling dark cocoa supplements, which put it into a supplement category that gets it away from the FDA. So they're out from under the FDA. I have to admit that I like milk chocolate better. I'm sorry, I have very unsophisticated taste in candy. And I just think it tastes better. I don't like the dark, bitter chocolate very much. But if you do, it's fine. But one of the things that the studies have shown in that in order for it to have the antioxidants in it to have any effect, you have to eat really a lot of it. Okay, go have fun.
So is it some phenol or something that's?
I can't remember what it is, but there's something in chocolate that's supposed to be, there's an antioxidant in chocolate that's supposed to be really good for you. But you have to eat a lot of chocolate to get it.
And all the sugar that goes with it.
And all this, well, the problem with dark chocolate is it doesn't have enough sugar in my.
In your opinion.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to call it. That was really fun, really wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights and career. And not sure when we'll ever cross paths again, but I'll wish you well. And again, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to be here.
All right. All right. Bye now.
Bye.